Welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Today is Tuesday, April 1st, day 543 of the war. I'm Amanda Borshel-Dan, joining you from our Jerusalem office with our legal reporter, Jeremy Sharon, and archaeology and religion reporter, Rosella Takatin. Hello to you both.
Hi, Amanda.
Hey, Amanda. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me. Jeremy will fill us in what's happening in an investigation into the Prime Minister's office that is currently known as Qatargate. We'll also learn about the Israeli High Court's ruling that the country is not intentionally starving Gazans during this ongoing war. And we'll hear about his trip this week out into the Palestinian village of Jinba in the southern Hebron Hills, where there was a violent raid by settler extremists on Friday. Rosella will tell us about a new Pew survey that shows that 25% of American Jews who were raised as Jewish don't consider themselves as Jews when they're adults. That's already quite a lot, but we're going to end with a new archaeological find that maybe, just maybe, proof of the biblical battle at Armageddon. All this and more when we're back. First, an update. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced this morning that he is backtracking on his decision to appoint Vice Admiral Eli Sharvit as the next head of the Shin Bet. This comes some 24 hours after the surprise appointment yesterday. So let's turn to you, Jeremy. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused police of holding two of his aides hostages yesterday after they were arrested over their alleged engagement in illicit ties with Qatar while working for the prime minister. Of course, critics pounced on the premier for using the phrase held hostage to describe the arrest of Qatargate suspects Jonathan Urich and Eli Feldstein, of course, right now, while 59 Israelis are actually being held hostage in Gaza, 24 of which we believe are still alive. So, Jeremy, there is a massive gag order on this investigation we're calling Qatargate. So tell us what happened yesterday that was a bit of a development.
So, I mean, a bit of a development, perhaps an understatement. There were some really dramatic developments and in really unusual and highly irregular circumstances. So, as you said, Jonathan Urich and Eli Feldstein, who served as close aides to Netanyahu, as spokespeople and kind of spin doctor type assistants, they were arrested in connection with the investigation into Qatargate. They're both suspected of having connections to Doha while working as aides to the prime minister, and the different aspects of a conflict of interests, and also other suspicions of money laundering and other financial crimes in connection to their activities with Qatar, and at the same time while working with Netanyahu. So they were arrested, and then we learned during the course of the day that the Attorney General had actually told the police that they need to interview Netanyahu as somebody with knowledge of the circumstances surrounding this investigation. So Netanyahu then cut short his testimony in his criminal trial, which is obviously separate from this whole investigation. This is his criminal trial on corruption charges, which has been going on since 2020. He left that trial to go and give testimony to the police's major crimes unit, Lahav 433, and we had this crazy circumstances where the prime minister is going from his own personal legal proceedings to giving details about another criminal investigation into his close aides, and it became clear that it's not completely been ruled out that Netanyahu might actually have to give further testimony under caution, meaning as a suspect in this Qatargate investigation. So, that was just some of the events surrounding yesterday's legal developments. And one further detail is that Netanyahu's personal lawyer in his corruption trial is also representing Jonathan Urich. And before even Netanyahu left his trial, his lawyer, Amit Haddad, had to leave earlier in order to go and tend to the legal necessities of Jonathan Urich. So really unprecedented day in Israel yesterday.
Well, I'm speaking with a Brit, so I had to say a bit of a development, right, Jeremy?
Right.
Okay. Moving along, the High Court of Justice ruled unanimously on Thursday that Israel has taken a variety of steps to provide for the humanitarian needs of Gaza's civilian population during the current war with Hamas, and that there is no cause for the court to order the government and the army to take any additional action. The court found that at least 2 out of the 3 conditions for establishing a belligerent occupation have not been met by Israel, in particular that the IDF still does not have effective control of the territory and is unable to exercise governing authority. So, Jeremy, what are the other 2 conditions that are not being met currently?
So the 3 conditions are having boots on the ground, a physical presence. The other condition is that the foreign power is able to exercise its own governing authority. And the third condition is that the previous ruling power is no longer able to exercise its governing authority. The issue of a belligerent occupation is important because if the court had found Israel to be in this status of a belligerent occupation of Gaza, it would mean that Israel would have much more heightened responsibilities towards the civilian population in Gaza. In fact, not only being responsible for transferring the aid into the territory, but for distributing it to the population. So that was the significance of that aspect of the petition. With the petitions, the main focus and thrust of the petitions was back in the beginning of 2024, when there was concerns about, starvation and famine in the Gaza Strip raised by various international NGOs. And these organizations petitioned the court, and they asked the court to order the government to allow unfettered access of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. So over the course of 2024, there was 5 hearings, some of which I covered, and there was various legal proceedings. And the court heard all the claims from Qatargate, which is the Israeli unit within the defense ministry responsible for coordinating the transfer of aid. It heard the claims of the petitioners. It asked for extra information. Some of that information was given behind closed doors because it was sensitive and classified. And then the court issued this ruling just last week, at the end of last week. And it said that it did not find that there was cause to accede to the request of the petitioners to order the government to allow more aid in, because the court found that there was enough aid going in, that Israel had done enough to discharge its responsibilities in terms of allowing humanitarian aid to get to the civilian population. Just important to know that, the person who wrote the majority opinion here is the new president, Isaac Amit. He is a liberal. His appointment as president was bitterly opposed by the current government. And this all comes against the background of the very severe charges against Israel in the International Criminal Court and in the International Court of Justice, that Israel used starvation as a tool of war in its war against Hamas. And that is a crime against humanity, as the International Criminal Court pointed out in seeking its arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. So here, a very liberal president of Israel's Supreme Court, who the government, which is conducting the war, actually hates, saying, actually, Israel has fulfilled its obligations in terms of providing humanitarian aid. And Amit even said explicitly, the petitions have not come even close, that was his exact words, to proving that Israel has used starvation as a tool of war. And I think he used those words specifically in light of the of the motions against Israel in those international fora. And I think that would be hard to dismiss his opinion, since he is very independent. It's so independent that the Justice Minister and the Prime Minister fought his appointment tooth and nail. And I don't think that it will be easy to dismiss the findings of this court that Israel has in fact allowed sufficient humanitarian aid into Gaza to provide for its needs and to ensure that it does not violate international law.
I just want to emphasize 2 of the points that you made here. And one is that it is through 2024. So, of course, that's not taking into account what's happening right now on the ground. And the other aspect is that you mentioned independent, that Amit is independent and he is an independent voice. And that is exactly the issue that so many have taken to the streets about, because it is so important for Israel standing in these international courts to have an independent judiciary. Okay, Jeremy, our time is running short, and I want to run now to an item that is just really making waves across the world. And yesterday, the IDF issued a statement announcing that it it had disciplined several officers and troops for vandalizing Palestinian property in Jinba, which is in the southern Hebron Hills, after an investigation was conducted into the incident. Now, the IDF statements didn't address questions that you had, Jeremy, regarding the villagers' claims that troops had stood by while the settler extremists attacked residents and prevented a Red Crescent ambulance from evacuating the wounded. And what's also really fascinating to me is just seeing how really seriously the IDF is taking these complaints by the villagers. And of course, they were documented on video. But IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir went to Jinba himself to investigate the incident on Sunday. You were there on Sunday as well. Did you happen to see him there?
I did not see Zamir there on Sunday. I did see two police investigators there. And that in itself is actually a rare occurrence. I followed violence in the South Hebron Hills area for the last 3 years. One of the major complaints of the residents and of their legal representatives is that the police rarely, if ever, go to take evidence, go to take testimony from the victims of these kind of settler attacks. So I think, the fact that the police investigators were there and relatively swiftly after the incident shows to some extent that, the police are taking this incident in particular more seriously than previous incidents. And there's also video footage, clear video footage of what happened, and that makes it harder to ignore as well. So that's an important aspect of what's happening here. Whether or not we'll see charges brought, that's another question. And if the police rarely go to take evidence and take testimony, then it's even rarer that actual indictments are brought. But, we can see what happens with that.
Right. Okay. So, Jeremy, you were there on Sunday and you came back shaken. We talked about it the following day, and I want you to describe a little bit what you actually saw on the ground there.
Yeah, I think it really is quite a distressing incident. And, you go to this place, Jinba, it's really a kind of poor, ramshackle, tumble down kind of place. Nothing's so organized. There's no proper infrastructure. And these people are poor people. They make a living from farming, sheep farming, production of dairy products and other agricultural activity. And what happened was a multi-layered attack in which there was some kind of friction or incident between a settler and a member of a resident of Jinba. The settlers claimed that settler was injured, although it appears that the Palestinian shepherd was also injured in the same incident. Then, a short while later, there was a massive infiltration of a couple of dozen settlers. They rampaged through the village. They severely beat 3 men of the same family, putting them all in hospital. One is in intensive care still. And then an IDF force came. It's unclear exactly who comprised that force, but it definitely included, according to the testimony of the villagers who talked to me, it included members of units who are mobilized settlers. That is, it's like a regional defense unit comprised of soldiers who live in nearby settlements. And they went to arrest. There wasn't any settlers to arrest there. They'd already fled. So they arrested 22 members of Jinba. At that time, there was the 3 members of this family were still injured. And it was those soldiers who the residents say prevented the ambulance from entering. And then later that night, another IDF force, also with these mobilized settlers, but not only, came back to Jinba in the dead of night, 2:00 in the morning, apparently searching for weapons. That was the original claim. But they ransacked the place. They destroyed an EU-funded clinic. They destroyed an Italian-funded school in the village. They threw the agricultural products on the floor, yogurt, which had been prepared, butter, olive oil. There's videos of those products just being, having been spilt out on the floor. And again, these are poor people and they make their livelihood off of this kind of produce. And so this is something which is really devastating for them. In this raid in the middle of the night, a lot of the men of Jinba had already were not in the village because they were under arrest in the Kiryat Arba police station nearby. So a bunch of these women, in one home, there was 15 women, and I think about 10 of them were adult women and about 5 kids, including a baby. And the soldiers came in, they burst in, they ordered them all out in the middle of the night, ordered them to kneel on the ground, hands on their head. They turned the place upside down, looking for weapons, which they didn't find any. There was no evidence or presentation that any weapons or ammunition or anything like that had been found. And it was, just the description of the events was a very brutal and violent raid. And again, this is now not by the settlers, that was earlier. This is by IDF forces. And I think obviously the evidence that we've seen and the video footage is why the new IDF chief of staff and the commander of the Central Command in the West Bank took this incident so seriously. And they did say that what happened violated the IDF's professional and moral standards. And I think that is clear because there doesn't seem to be any reason to, smash windows in a school and destroy a medical clinic when looking for weapons, or even to, throw dairy products on the floor. But I got a real sense of fear and trauma from the people I spoke to, especially those women who were subject to that raid in the middle of the night. And one of them said something which really struck home to me. She said, "We live in injustice, and there is no justice in Israel." And I think that was a very sad statement, and especially bearing in, I think it rings true to us with regards to what's happening to this community, this set of communities in the South Hebron Hills, where they don't have any protection really from the police. And in fact, we were talking about President of the Supreme Court, Isaac Amit, in a case which came before him in the Supreme Court recently, about a different community in the same region. He rapped on the table and said, "You police have not done anything. He said, you don't do anything. You don't arrest anyone. You don't take evidence, and nothing is being done about these attacks." And I think that just reinforces the kind of problems which we're seeing transpire in Jinbur and other places. And this, Jinbur is just the latest incident of a series of incidents over the last few weeks, which have taken place in this region, in which so many of these communities have been attacked, and not too much seems to have being done.
But it does appear that the IDF and parts of official Israel are taking it seriously, and we definitely are. So I know, Jeremy, you're following up on this. We are going to go to a short break. And we're back. Rosella, almost 1 in 4 U.S. adults who were raised Jewish no longer identify as such, according to a new report by the Pew Research Center that was released last week. Now, the report focuses on the phenomenon of switching religions around the world, and it is based on data obtained by polling almost 37,000 Americans and over 41,000 individuals in 35 other countries, including Israel. So, Rosella, you did not grow up in North America. Obviously, from your accent, you are Italian. And were you surprised by the high level, the 25% of American Jews who just don't consider themselves Jewish anymore?
Well, I have to say it feels like a really high number. We are talking about 1 in 4 people. At the same time, we look at Israel and we see that basically virtually no one switches. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't change the way they connect to religion. And we see actually in the data about Israel that a lot of people become more religious and especially less religious in Israel, but they still consider themselves Jewish. And in the US, they simply do not. And most of them, we have to say, consider themselves unaffiliated. 17% of these 24%, and only 2% convert to Christianity and 1% to Islam. So really, most people just decide that religion is not something for them. It feels like a lot. And when sometimes, there are all these questions about Jewish continuity and everything, well, this survey clearly shows that maybe Israel is actually the biggest answer to the question of Jewish continuity. And it would be very interesting if in the future would be possible to know numbers of communities outside of Israel and the US. On the other hand, I think it's also important to notice, and I only took me a moment to actually look at it, looking at the report, the percentages of people who have switched out of Christianity and Islam in the US are quite similar. We have about 73% of people who were raised Christians who still identify as Christians, and about 77% of people who were raised Muslim who still identify as such. Now, if we look at countries, let's say it's countries that we associate with less religion freedom, or at least more traditional societies, we see that things are very similar. Also in Islam, also even Christianity in the Philippines, a lot less people switch. So really, we also have to ask ourselves if, living in a very free, thriving society, the price is also people having more choices. And not to say that Israel is not necessarily a thrive and free society, but I do think it's interesting to see how numbers are consistent across religious groups in different countries.
The other number that jumped out to me, and I don't have your piece in front of me right now, but when I was editing it, the number that was really interesting was to see how many Americans converted into Islam. Do you have that number at hand?
Correct. It's about 20%. 20% of people who identify as Muslim today are converts. And by the way, also the same is true for Jews. That's more or less the percentage. And again, this tells us that, in a country like the US, the land of freedom, people really do make different choices. And I do want to also say that, researchers were not really able to have independent data on Judaism in the other countries where they investigated because communities are too small. But we see that among the Western world countries, the US is still a country where people, remain connected to religion more than, let's say, in other countries in Europe or in the rest of the Western world. This is obviously broadly speaking.
Okay, so let's finish our program with the story that I just wish we could talk about this kind of stuff instead of Jeremy's beat all the time. And
oh, yes.
What can you do?
Yeah.
For the first time, a team of Israeli archaeologists has uncovered ancient artifacts at northern Israel's Armageddon site. Yes, it's a real place that might offer proof of an epic battle that was documented in the book of Kings, 2 Kings, and Chronicles. This is a battle between a king of Judah and an Egyptian pharaoh. So what they seem to have found is a predominance of Egyptian poorly made ceramics that indicate that they weren't there for commerce, rather for, cooking. And so the old adage is, of course, that an army marches on its stomach. So, Rosella, what can you tell us about the findings at Armageddon?
So this is the site is known here in Israel as Megiddo, and the Armageddon term might be a poor pronunciation of Har Megiddo, the Mount of Megiddo. And this is a site that has been known to archaeologists for over a century, essentially. It was first digged in the 1920s by the University of Chicago. Now this is very cool, except that a century ago archaeologists did not have the scientific tools and methods that they have today, and so they messed up. And modern archaeologists have been researching areas within the site where they could actually see the different layers, the different times, and especially they were interested in the past. Basically 30 years, an expedition by the Tel Aviv University, they were interested in identifying an Assyrian layer, roughly 7th century BCE. So the question is, if you look for proof that something mentioned in the Bible happened, usually you're not going to find, an inscription mentioning the names or other things that we're saying, oh, it's really there. But we see that, the Bible mentions Egyptians there, and there's no evidence, archaeological evidence that Egyptians were there. And then all of a sudden, archaeologists managed to identify this area X where they could really find all the right layers, all the right time. And in the relevant layer, 7th century BC, this battle is supposed to have taken place in 609 BCE. They found 100 pieces of Egyptian crude pottery, the highest concentration essentially from the time in the Levant outside of Egypt. And lo and behold, Egyptians were there, and probably they were soldiers. They weren't, merchants with very high-end pottery. And also they even found some pottery from Greece, and, mercenaries from Greece were thought of having joined the Egyptian army at the time. And this is even cooler because one of the characters mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, and even more so in the New Testament, Gog, according to the experts, might actually be identified with the Greek king Gigel, and therefore this Greek pottery might even say that actually some Greek present and this king that was battling against the Israelite was somewhat involved and was somewhat in the picture.
It is so cool. It's all cool. I don't know what is more cool or less cool, but thank you, Rosella, for letting us end our program this way. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and edited on video by Thomas Gersh. Please check out another installment tomorrow. Until then, shalom.